It started with a bark, loud, insistent, and completely out of place. Officer Janelle Carter was pouring her second cup of coffee when she heard it. The morning was still, save for the hum of the radio and the occasional shuffle of papers inside the sleepy town's police station. Then came that bark again, sharper this time, echoing down the hallway like a cry for help. She glanced toward the door and blinked. A large German shepherd, matted, dirty, panting, stood in the middle of the station lobby. "Where the hell did you come from?" she murmured, setting her mug down. The dog paced anxiously, mud streaked up its legs and chest. One of its paws left a trail of dried blood across the floor. Its brown eyes were wide, frantic, not the look of a stray, but of something trying desperately to be understood. Before anyone could move, the dog turned and ran to the door, scratching at the bottom with his claws, then turning his head to bark at them again. "He wants us to follow," said a voice behind her. Detective Laura Grant stepped out from her office, still buttoning her coat. Her long auburn hair was tied back, and there was a weariness in her eyes that only 10 years of chasing ghosts could explain. But there was something else now, too, recognition. "That's Max," she said softly. "Thomas Blake's dog." Janelle frowned. "You mean the old detective who lives out by the woods?" "Yeah, retired. Keeps to himself. Haven't seen him in months." Laura's voice dropped. "If Max is here alone, something's wrong." Without another word, Laura grabbed her keys. Max was already pushing through the door, tail low, looking back every few steps. He was leading them. The drive out to the Blake property was silent. The road narrowed into a dirt path lined with pine trees. Mist hung low between the trunks, curling around the tires like breath. Max ran ahead, never stopping, never letting them out of his sight. They passed the cabin, quiet, windows dark, and continued on foot into the woods behind it. Max weaved through the underbrush with purpose, barking occasionally to make sure they were still coming. After nearly 15 minutes, he stopped at the base of a massive oak tree. The air felt suddenly heavier. The tree was old, ancient even. Gnarled roots bulged from the ground like veins. At its base, partially hidden by a pile of leaves and pine needles, was something that didn't belong. Laura approached slowly, heart pounding, and then she saw it. A hand, pale, weathered, still. They cleared the leaves, and there he was. Thomas Blake, lying on his side, one hand outstretched, his face serene, as if he'd simply laid down to sleep. But the smell told another story. So did the dried blood beneath his head. Laura dropped to her knees. Jesus. She'd known Thomas since she was a rookie. He was the kind of detective they didn't make anymore. Intense, brilliant, infuriating. He'd taken her under his wing when others wouldn't. And then, one day, he disappeared from the force, retired early, said he was done chasing shadows. Now he was here, alone, cold, and Max. Max lay beside the body, curling himself around it protectively, whining softly. His eyes met Laura's, and in them she saw something that made her throat tighten. Grief. Janelle stepped back. "We need to call this in." Laura nodded, but her eyes stayed on Max, on the old man who'd spent the last years of his life with only a dog and his regrets. She reached for her radio, then paused. Beside Thomas's body was a canvas satchel, half buried beneath the leaves. Carefully, she opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a small cloth-wrapped bundle, and an old, tarnished silver lighter engraved with 2 initials, E.W. She looked at the journal. The first page read, "If someone finds this, then I'm already dead. But the truth didn't die with me. I made sure of that." Laura felt the chill in her bones deepen. Whatever Thomas had been working on out here, whatever truth he'd been chasing, it hadn't let him go. And judging by the look in Max's eyes, it hadn't let him die peacefully either. She stood, hand resting gently on Max's head. "Good boy," she whispered. "You brought him home." But something told her this was just the beginning. The real story, the one Thomas had kept hidden all these years, was buried deeper than any grave. And Max was the only one who knew how to find it. In life, Thomas Blake wasn't an easy man to like, but he was damn near impossible to forget. Laura sat in the cabin later that evening, Max lying quietly at her feet, still and watchful. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting soft shadows over the walls. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood, dust, and something older, memory maybe. She let her eyes wander over the space. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with true crime novels, law manuals, and yellow case files. On the desk, a faded photo of a younger Thomas in uniform, standing beside a woman whose smile was all light and summer, and a toddler with curls. Long gone now. Thomas had been a legend in their department back in the day. Hard-nosed, relentless, and with an instinct for truth that sometimes ran ahead of rules. For decades, he cracked some of the toughest cases in the state. Child abductions, cold cases, political cover-ups. He made enemies doing it. A lot of them. But the case that broke him came in 2004. Laura still remembered the name. Sarah Jensen, 17 years old, vanished after leaving her after-school job at a cafe on Pinewood Avenue. No witnesses, no security footage, no body. Just her car parked neatly outside her home, in a town full of whispers. Thomas had taken it personally. Sarah reminded him of his daughter, Laura suspected, or maybe of the life he'd lost. The investigation had barely begun when things got strange. Thomas's requests for warrants were delayed. Witnesses refused to talk. Evidence went missing from the lab. A week later, Internal Affairs opened a quiet review into his methods. And then came the warning. He never told Laura exactly what it was, just that someone powerful wanted him to back off. Someone who wasn't afraid to ruin a career or worse. Thomas didn't scare easily, but he wasn't stupid. He handed in his badge and walked away from a 30-year career without a word to anyone. Except Max. Max had been just a pup then. A retirement gift from an old friend in K9. He listens better than the brass ever did. Thomas used to joke. For the next 15 years, he stayed off the radar. No social media. No public complaints. But Laura had always known better. Now she had proof. She reached for the journal again, the one they'd found buried beside him. The pages were rough, written in thick, blocky handwriting. Dates, names, scribbled thoughts. And across the top of one page, underlined twice. They buried the girl, but they forgot the roots. She flipped back to the front, to the first date, August 4th, 2004. Day 1. Sarah's gone. No forced entry at the house. Her mom says she didn't come home from work. Manager said she clocked out at 6:45. Car and driveway by 7:15. No one saw her arrive. No one saw her leave the cafe. No one saw anything. That's never true. Someone always sees. Laura kept reading, heart tightening. Day 5. Her phone pinged near Whitmore Hill. That's not public. I'll keep it that way for now. Day 9. One of the cafe busboys said Sarah had been nervous lately. Said a man came in twice that week. Tall, gray suit, drove a black town car. Said he thought it was Sarah's uncle, but she told him she didn't have one. Day 12. The lighter. I found it. Engraved EW. He dropped it behind her car. I shouldn't have taken it, but they would have made it disappear. That same lighter was now on the coffee table in front of her. She reached for it and turned it over in her hand. Heavy, worn, the kind of thing a rich man kept in his pocket out of habit. EW. Earl Whitmore. The name was almost too big to say out loud. He'd been a U.S. senator. He still held office, had launched a campaign for governor just a month ago. A clean public record. A beloved philanthropist. And if Thomas was right, a murderer. Laura looked down at Max. You knew, didn't you? Max lifted his head slightly, ears twitching, as if acknowledging the question. Thomas didn't just die out there. He was trying to finish something. Her voice broke slightly, but she steadied it. She had work to do, answers to find, and she owed Thomas that much. She stood and took one last look around the cabin. On the wall, hidden behind an old newspaper clipping about a fishing tournament, was a pin board. She pulled it aside. Dozens of photos, maps, red string, Sarah Jensen's name at the center, circled in red ink. And beside it, Earl Whitmore's smiling campaign portrait. Thomas hadn't retired. He'd just gone underground. And maybe, just maybe, he'd found what he needed before they got to him. Laura turned to Max. You ready to finish this? Max stood up slowly, stiff from age, but alert, tail wagging once, as if he understood every word. She didn't need backup. She had the best damn partner Thomas Blake ever trained. The sun had barely risen when Laura returned to the cabin. She'd barely slept. Her mind spun in tight, relentless circles. Pages from Thomas's journal flickering behind her eyes, names and dates overlapping like puzzle pieces that refused to click. She didn't have a search warrant yet, but this wasn't about law anymore. This was about Thomas, about Sarah, about the silence that had lasted too long. She stepped carefully inside the cabin, the old wood groaning beneath her boots. Max padded beside her, quiet, alert, and maybe even a little hopeful. Dogs knew when something was unfinished. Maybe better than people did. Laura sat at the dining table, where she'd spread Thomas's satchel and everything in it. She opened the journal again, this time determined to read every word. The entries had grown more frantic toward the end. May 19th, 2021. The kid came back, Robert, the janitor's boy. He says his dad told him about a locked room beneath the Whitmore estate. Said Sarah had been there. Said he heard crying through the vents. But the old man died 2 months ago. Can't verify it. Still, the boy remembered the sound. June 3rd, 2021. Found a service blueprint of the Whitmore property. There's a crawl space below the main residence that doesn't show on modern surveys. Access point hidden behind the wine cellar. I'll try to get in through the woods. Need Max to help track the perimeter. June 18th, 2021. I think they know I'm close. Car's been parked at the trailhead 3 nights this week. Same black Lincoln every time. EW drove one back then. He still does. If they get me before I get in, at least Max will know where to go. Laura paused. She looked at Max, who now lay curled on the wooden floor, but stared at her as if waiting. You took him out there, didn't you? She murmured. You showed him the path. She reached into the satchel again and unwrapped the bundle. Inside were 3 items. A folded topographical map marked in red ink. A cassette tape labeled Whitmore, Basement Vents, 2004. A black and white photo of Sarah Jensen in a school uniform, smiling nervously beside a car. The map was detailed, hand-drawn in places. Red circles marked key locations. One was labeled Oak Tree, Fallback Point. Another, Crawl Access SE Ridge. And near the edge of the property line, No Man's Land watched. He tried to draw a way in, and failed. Laura picked up the lighter again, flipping it in her palm. It was engraved simply, EW, Providence Club, 1997. A private club, political elite. It wasn't the kind of item a teenager like Sarah would carry or drop. It was the kind of thing a man like Earl Whitmore would flick open casually, lighting cigars in back rooms where deals were made and lives were broken. Thomas had kept it for 17 years, and he'd known better than to hand it in. The moment it touched official hands, it would vanish along with the truth. Laura pulled her laptop from her bag and began typing. She searched for blueprints, permits, land records, anything that could confirm what Thomas wrote. But the Whitmore estate was sealed tight, purchased through layers of trusts and shell companies. No floor plans, no utility schematics, no crawl spaces, all erased, all intentional. She glanced again at the journal. They buried the girl, but they forgot the roots. Her eyes narrowed. Roots. Was that metaphor or literal? She pulled up satellite imagery of the property. Dense forest surrounded the estate on 3 sides. To the east, a narrow ridge of pines, sloping into a natural ravine. She zoomed in. There, a line, almost invisible, winding through the trees. A trail. Laura's breath caught. Thomas had found a way in, or at least close. That afternoon, she went back to the tree where Max had first led them, the same place Thomas's body had been found. She stood in silence for a moment, then crouched, brushing away more leaves. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, until Max began to sniff, then dig. After a few minutes, his paws struck something solid. Laura reached in and pulled out a tin lunchbox, rusted and sealed with duct tape. Inside was a thumb drive. When she opened it on her laptop later that night, it contained 4 folders. Photos, witness statements, unofficial, police reports, altered, audio, cassette, Sarah. She opened the last one first. Static, then a girl's voice. If anyone finds this, my name is Sarah Jensen. I was taken. I don't know where I am. Laura froze. Her chest tightened. The audio was poor but real. Sarah was crying, panicked. She spoke in whispers, clearly terrified. He said, "If I talk, no one will believe me. He says he's powerful. I saw the lighter. It says E.W." Then a loud thump. A scream. Static. Silence. Laura's eyes blurred with tears. 17 years. And now she was hearing the voice of a girl everyone else had forgotten. No, not everyone. Thomas hadn't, and neither had Max. Laura closed the laptop and placed a hand on Max's head. He looked up, licking her wrist gently. "You stayed," she whispered, even when the rest of the world walked away. She turned back to the satchel. There was one last envelope tucked at the bottom, unmarked, sealed with wax. Inside, a single sheet. "Laura, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. But you can. You're better than I ever was. Smarter, louder, braver. Don't let them bury her again. Finish what I couldn't. TB." Laura folded the letter carefully and slid it into her coat pocket. Tomorrow, she would go to the ridge, and she wouldn't be going alone. It was still dark when Laura parked just off the gravel road near the edge of the woods. A heavy fog rolled low across the forest floor like ghostly breath, swallowing sound and shadow alike. Max sat beside her in the passenger seat, calm but focused. His ears twitched at every distant crack of branch or rustle of leaves. The world was waking slowly, but Max had never looked more alert. She turned to him. "You ready?" His eyes met hers, steady. Then, without waiting for the door to open all the way, he jumped out and padded forward, nose close to the ground, tail low, body moving with purpose. He wasn't sniffing like a dog going for a walk. He was tracking. Laura followed close behind, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the damp air. Max led her around the ridge line that bordered the Whitmore property, just like the map had shown. This wasn't a trail, not one meant for people. The brush grew thick, thorns tugged at her sleeves, but Max kept going. He paused only to check behind him, then forged ahead again. They walked nearly 20 minutes before Max stopped. They stood at the edge of a small clearing where the pine trees gave way to a steep incline. To anyone else, it would have looked like nothing, a slope covered in moss and brambles. But Max moved straight to a cluster of flat stones near the base and began pawing at them. Laura knelt, clearing debris, and then she saw it, a slab of concrete, about 2 feet wide, a narrow steel ring embedded in the center, rusted with age. She grabbed it, pulled. The hatch groaned in protest, but opened, releasing a breath of air so stale and metallic it made her gag. A tunnel, unlit, silent old. Max sniffed at the edge, then looked at her. She hesitated. This wasn't protocol. It wasn't even legal. But Thomas hadn't waited for permission, and Sarah hadn't had time to. Laura took a breath, turned on her headlamp, and climbed down. The tunnel was narrow, the air close. It smelled like mold, old oil, and rot. Her boots echoed on the concrete floor. Max followed behind her, light on his collar bobbing with every step. About 30 feet in, the passage opened into a larger underground room. Low ceiling, concrete walls. There were no lights. No sound, but there were signs of life. Old furniture, a stain mattress, crates of canned food long expired, a blanket folded neatly on the ground, and against the far wall, a chair bolted to the floor with cracked leather straps on the armrests. Laura froze. Max growled low in his throat. She stepped closer, stomach turning. This wasn't just a storm shelter or storage cellar. It was a holding cell, and Sarah Jensen had been here. On a nearby shelf, she found a small metal lunchbox. Inside were a hairbrush, a diary missing its cover, and a strip of Polaroid photos, half torn, Sarah's face in all of them. Some smiling, some not. Laura's hand shook as she opened the diary to the first page. "I don't know what day it is. I don't know if anyone's looking for me. But I'm not crazy. He's real. The man with the ring and the lighter. He said if I'm quiet, I get to live. But I hear the dog barking at night. He comes close sometimes. A shepherd, I think. He doesn't come down here, but he's close. Maybe he'll tell someone. Maybe dogs know things people forget to listen to." Laura closed the diary, throat tight. She looked at Max, who was now sniffing one of the walls. His tail wagged once, tentative as if remembering something from long ago. Thomas must have found this place, or maybe just knew it existed. But if he had, why hadn't he exposed it? She looked around. Then she saw it. A corner of the ceiling panel above the chair had been pried loose. She climbed on a broken crate and reached inside. Her fingers closed around a waterproof pouch. Inside, a USB drive, a folded letter, a flash photo taken in harsh light, showing a man with salt and pepper hair kissing a girl's forehead. Sarah's eyes were shut. His weren't. And on his hand, a gold ring engraved with EW. Laura read the letter. I couldn't send this through the department. Not again. Every time I tried, the files disappeared. Every time I told someone, they got cold feet. So I buried it here. If someone finds this, know that Sarah's story wasn't a rumor. It was a warning. And he's not done yet. TB. Max whimpered, then laid down beside her feet. Laura sat on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by ghosts, by proof, by pain, and by a dog who refused to forget. She ran her hand through Max's thick fur. You brought me here, she whispered. You remembered. Max didn't move. He didn't need to. He had done his job. And now, it was her turn to do hers. 3 days later, Laura sat in her car across from the Whitmore campaign headquarters, engine off, eyes narrowed behind the windshield. The building was sleek, glass-fronted, patriotic banners flapping in the breeze. Inside, powerful men shook hands, cameras flashed, and slogans promised change. Earl Whitmore was running for governor. Again, and he was winning. Laura had spent the last 72 hours poring over the contents of the USB Thomas had hidden. Dozens of files, including versions of police reports. One set clean and official, the other raw and damning. Witness statements redacted, rewritten, or erased. Photos time-stamped in 2004 that placed Whitmore's car near the Jensen residence the night Sarah vanished. Medical records of a girl treated for internal injuries at a private clinic under an alias just 1 week later. Everything pointed in one direction. But it wasn't enough. Not for a court. Not for a warrant. Not in this state. Not with Whitmore's name on every donation plaque, his photo on every news station, his grip on every judge and police chief from here to the state line. Laura had submitted a request for a search warrant of the Whitmore estate 2 days ago. It was denied. No probable cause. No fresh evidence. No public interest. Bullshit. She knew stonewalling when she saw it. They didn't want her to dig. They didn't want the truth. They wanted silence. She sat back in her seat, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make her knuckles white. The walls were closing in, but she wasn't alone. That night, she returned to her apartment and found the envelope wedged beneath her door. No name, just one line scrawled in red marker. We know where the dog sleeps. Her heart stopped. She dropped the envelope and bolted to the back room, where Max was curled on his bed, tail thumping as she entered. He looked up, blinking sleepily. Fine. Unharmed. For now. Laura knelt beside him, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. It was never just about threats. It was about fear, about control, the same tactics they'd used on Thomas. And now it was her turn in the crosshairs. She stayed up all night, watching the street from her window with the lights off, Max by her side. By morning, she had made her decision. She wouldn't go to the DA. She wouldn't wait for the system to grant her permission. She would take the evidence straight to the one place Whitmore couldn't bury it. The public. 2 days later, Laura appeared as a guest on a nationally syndicated podcast, Cold Truth, known for cracking open suppressed investigations and challenging power. She brought the USB. She brought the photos. She brought the audio of Sarah's trembling voice. And she brought Max. The episode aired within 12 hours. It went viral in 5. By the end of the week, the state was on fire with questions. Who was the girl on the tape? Was the powerful Earl Whitmore connected to her disappearance? Why had police reports been altered? And why had a retired cop ended up dead just days after closing in? Public pressure exploded. News outlets dug into Whitmore's past. Activists demanded transparency. Victims' rights groups rallied outside the Capitol. And for the first time in 2 decades, the case of Sarah Jensen was reopened. But the pushback came swift and brutal. Laura was placed on administrative leave pending unauthorized disclosure of sensitive material. She was painted as unstable, emotional, reckless. Commentators called her a fame-hungry detective exploiting a dead girl's tragedy. Her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but Max's bed had been slashed. Still, she refused to be silenced. She moved into a safe house provided by the podcast producers. Max stayed close, never more than a few feet from her. And then, just when she thought they'd bury the fire, a woman came forward, anonymous at first, her voice disguised in an interview with 60 Minutes. She claimed she had worked at the Whitmore estate as a cleaner in 2004. She remembered a girl locked in the wine cellar, heard crying, heard screaming, saw blood. She had been paid to leave, paid well, but after hearing the podcast, she couldn't stay silent anymore. Laura met her in person 3 days later. Her name was Helen Carter, 72, quiet, hands trembling. She handed Laura an envelope. Inside, a photograph of Sarah Jensen taken with a disposable camera in the garden behind the Whitmore house, date-stamped 3 days after she was reported missing. In the photo, Sarah was smiling, but her left eye was bruised. Her arms were bare, and something in her posture was off, like she had been told to pose. And behind her, out of focus, stood a man holding a glass of wine. Earl Whitmore. That was the breaking point. Armed with Helen's testimony and the photo, Laura filed an emergency motion. This time, the judge granted the warrant. The Whitmore estate would be searched. Not in secrecy, not behind closed doors. In daylight, with cameras rolling, and with Max by her side. The search warrant was executed at precisely 10 a.m. on a crisp Monday morning. Television crews lined the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, their long lenses reaching like curious fingers into the manicured silence of political power. Protesters chanted beyond the hedges. Police cruisers idled by the curb. The air smelled of fall leaves, static and reckoning. Laura stood at the front gate, a vest marked investigation strapped to her chest, Max by her side. She could feel the tension rippling beneath her skin. This wasn't just a search. It was a collision between truth and power. And truth was finally pushing back. The estate was palatial, columns, marble steps, windows as tall as trees. But Laura wasn't interested in grandeur. She led the team straight through the back garden, past fountains and rose trellises, to the door leading down to the wine cellar. "I want the southeast corner first," she said. The blueprint Thomas had drawn, scratched out by hand on notebook paper and hidden beneath forest soil, was now a state-verified reference point. The cellar was cool and dark, lined with mahogany racks and vintage bottles untouched by time. At the far end was a plain plaster wall. But Laura knew what it really was. A lie. She tapped the bricks with her knuckles. "Hollow. Start here." Officers began removing panels, brick by brick, careful, methodical. And then, a metal door. Small, unmarked, sealed with a padlock. Laura stepped forward. Cut it. With a loud snap, the lock dropped. She pulled the door open slowly. The stench hit first. Stale air, mildew, something fouler underneath. Max barked once, then growled low. Laura raised her flashlight and stepped inside. It wasn't large, just 2 rooms. The first, empty, save for a rusted bed frame, a chain bolted to the floor, and a bare light bulb hanging like a single, pitiful sun. The second, worse. This room had walls covered in insulation padding, like a soundproof studio. But it wasn't for music. It was for silence. Scattered across the floor were pieces of a girl's life. Hair ties, a cracked compact mirror, a child's bracelet, a tattered stuffed rabbit in the corner, missing one eye, and on the far side, covered with a moldy tarp. Bones. Laura dropped to her knees, her throat closing. A skull. Small. Feminine. Delicate jawline. Beside it, a student ID, cracked and faded, still visible under layers of dirt. Sarah Jensen. No more doubt. No more theories. Just bones. Just truth. The forensics team moved in. Outside, the media erupted. The story broke within the hour. Human remains found a home of Governor Hopeful Earl Whitmore. Helicopters circled overhead like vultures. Commentators scrambled for spin. But Laura didn't care about any of it. She stayed with Sarah. until they took the bones away. Later that night, after 12 hours of evidence processing, Laura sat alone in the wine cellar, the smell of bleach and earth still lingering. Her hands were stained with dust. Her eyes burned. Max lay beside her, head on his paws, silent. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Thomas's letter again. Don't let them bury her again. You've been right all along. About Sarah, about the system, about the danger, and he had died for it. She looked down at Max. You brought me back to her, she whispered. To both of them. Max nudged her hand softly, and then a knock echoed from upstairs. It was Agent Russell from the FBI, holding a new folder. You want to see this, he said, stepping inside. Inside the folder were financial records, recently obtained from Whitmore's longtime accountant, after a well-timed subpoena. Hidden payments, offshore accounts, bribes to medical staff, janitors, contractors. Quiet payoffs to make a girl disappear, to make a basement vanish from blueprints, to make whispers dissolve into fog. But one name kept showing up, Dr. Wesley Dunn, a former private physician who'd worked for Whitmore in the early 2000s. And now, resurfaced in Arizona. Laura's eyes darkened. He treated her, she said, after the first assault. That's how she lived long enough to record that tape. Russell nodded. And he might still have records. If we get to him before Whitmore's people do. Laura stood. We're not finished. At sunrise the next morning, Laura walked Max down to the base of the hill behind the estate, away from cameras, away from the noise. She scattered wildflowers over the patch of earth where Sarah had once been buried beneath concrete and silence. She said no words, just stood in the golden light, a hand resting on Max's back, listening to the breeze sift through the trees. Sarah was no longer missing. She was found. She was heard. And finally, someone believed her. The media didn't just cover the story. They detonated it. Remains of missing teen found at estate of governor candidate Earl Whitmore. Secret chamber discovered beneath Whitmore's wine cellar. Who protected the monster? By noon, every major network in the country had the story pinned to their homepage. Commentators on opposite sides of the political spectrum, for once, found common ground. Horror. The public turned. Fast. Campaign donors pulled out within hours. Protesters multiplied. Crowds stood outside the state capitol with signs that read, "Her name was Sarah, and justice delayed is still justice." But Whitmore didn't fall silently. He issued a statement. Standing at a polished podium in a navy blue suit, he stared down the camera and called the entire investigation a smear campaign. I'm a victim of politically motivated lies, he said, voice measured. These so-called discoveries are based on fabrications. The remains have not been officially identified. The evidence could have been planted. I will not resign. I will not be intimidated. Then he turned to the camera and added, Detective Laura Grant is not pursuing justice. She's pursuing headlines. Laura watched the press conference on a TV at the FBI field office. Her jaw clenched. That man has no soul, she muttered. Agent Russell handed her coffee. You're not wrong, but he's still dangerous. That kind of power doesn't vanish overnight. He still has allies in high places. She knew he was right. That was the most terrifying part. That night, a woman called the podcast station that had aired Laura's story. She didn't give her name, didn't give her location, but her voice shook. I was there, she said. Not when the girl died, but before. I worked for him. I cleaned that house. I saw things. She agreed to meet. Laura sat alone at the coffee shop, scanning every face through the window. At exactly 9:02 p.m., a petite woman in her late 60s entered. Her hair was pulled back into a gray bun. She wore gloves, though the night was warm, and she carried a small, leather-bound address book in her trembling hands. Are you Laura? She whispered. Yes, Laura said. Thank you for coming. The woman sat, never taking off her gloves. My name is Ella Myers. I worked as a housekeeper at the Whitmore estate from 2003 to 2005. I was there when she was. Laura leaned in gently. Sarah? Ella nodded. Tears welled in her eyes. She wasn't supposed to be there. I mean, no one said anything. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear crying from under the floor. Real quiet. Muffled. Like someone trying not to cry. She swallowed hard. I asked about it once. Said I thought I heard an animal stuck down there. They gave me a bonus that week and told me never to mention it again. She looked down at her gloves. One day, I found blood on a towel. Not a lot, just enough to make you worry. I wanted to quit, but I needed the job. My daughter was sick. Laura's voice stayed soft. You're doing the right thing now. Ellen nodded. Then, as if pulling a piece of her soul from her purse, she handed Laura a faded envelope. I kept this, she said. I know it wasn't right, but I was scared, and I needed to remember her name. I needed to believe I hadn't made her up. Inside was a photo. Sarah Jensen, sitting on the back steps of the Whitmore garden. Her eyes wide, her shoulders hunched. She wasn't smiling. Behind her, barely in frame, Whitmore's hand rested on her shoulder, his ring clearly visible. E.W. Laura's hand shook as she held it. This wasn't just a witness. This was proof. The next morning, Ellen went public. In a nationally broadcast interview, she told the world everything. Her experience, the photo, the blood, the hush money. And the country erupted again. Petitions circulated. Demands for indictment flooded the Attorney General's office. Whitmore's approval ratings plummeted by the hour. By noon, the governor of the state issued an emergency press briefing. Until further notice, he said, Mr. Whitmore's campaign is hereby suspended. We will not tolerate obstruction of justice, no matter how powerful the accused. And then, finally, an arrest warrant. Laura stood beside Max as federal agents marched into the Whitmore estate. The cameras rolled as Earl Whitmore, still in his tailored suit, was led out in handcuffs. He didn't say a word, but his eyes found Laura through the crowd. And for the first time, she saw something behind them. Fear. That night, Laura and Max returned to the tree in the woods where Thomas's body was found. She brought two things, a framed photo of Thomas in uniform, and a small plaque that simply read, You weren't wrong. You were early. She placed them at the base of the tree and knelt beside Max. The breeze was soft, the forest quiet. She closed her eyes. Sarah could rest now. Thomas could rest now. And Max could sleep without guarding the dead. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that happens when people stop talking, but the kind that presses like a held breath, like the final few seconds before a storm breaks. Earl Whitmore sat at the defense table in a tailored charcoal gray suit. His hair was still immaculately combed, but there were deep shadows beneath his eyes, and for the first time in decades, he looked small. Smaller than the headlines. Smaller than the legend. Across the room, Laura sat quietly on the witness bench. Max lay curled at her feet, officially permitted in the courtroom due to his former K-9 service, and unofficially because no one had the courage to say no. The prosecution opened with precision. This is not a case about politics. It's about power. Power misused, power abused, and power that thought it could bury the truth, along with a 17-year-old girl named Sarah Jensen. The jury was shown the photographs. The secret room, the ring, the remains, and then Sarah's voice, from the cassette Thomas had hidden, played through the courtroom speakers. If anyone finds this, my name is Sarah Jensen. Laura watched the jurors flinch. A few teared up. The tape was short, but it was real, and that made it unbearable. Whitmore didn't react. He didn't need to. His lawyers argued lack of direct evidence, possible tampering, and chain of custody concerns. They called the case a witch hunt fueled by viral hysteria. But their words landed flat, because the jury had seen Sarah's face, and they had heard her fear. The most powerful moment came on the fourth day. Ellen Myers took the stand. The courtroom held its breath as she approached. Her voice was soft but clear. She described the house, the hush money, the blood, and then she said, I thought I was cleaning a house. I didn't know I was cleaning up a crime scene. Her words rippled through the courtroom like glass breaking underwater. Whitmore looked up for the first time in hours, and then looked down again. The trial lasted 12 days. The verdict came in less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, sexual assault of a minor, homicide, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice. Sentencing would come later, but the fall had already begun. That night, Laura walked the quiet halls of the precinct, past old plaques and photos. She stopped at the wall of retired officers, where a small black and white photo of Thomas Blake sat in the corner, faded with age. She pinned something beside it, a campaign button, Whitmore for Governor, 2004, and beneath it, a note in her own handwriting. Justice catches up. Sometimes it just needs a dog to lead the way. At the press conference the next day, the district attorney praised Laura by name. So did the governor. So did half the country. But that wasn't the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered came when a woman stepped out from the crowd after the cameras stopped rolling. Mid-40s, dark eyes, clutching the hand of a girl with Sarah's same cheekbones. "Are you Detective Grant?" she asked. Laura nodded. The woman held out a bouquet of wildflowers. "My sister was friends with Sarah. I was only a kid back then. I wanted to say thank you." The girl beside her whispered, "Did the dog help?" Laura smiled and nodded. More than anyone. Max wagged his tail. 1 week later, at a small private memorial in the woods near the tree where Thomas had died, they buried an engraved stone. Sarah Jensen, 1987 to 2004. She was never lost. They just stopped looking. Laura placed her hand on the stone. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Max sat beside her, head lowered, as if mourning in his own way. Later, she returned home, kicked off her boots, and sank into the couch. Max climbed up beside her, a rare treat. She looked at him, then at the folder on the table marked Blake, unsolved. Inside were pages of Thomas's notes on other cold cases. Laura smiled just a little. "Guess we're not done yet, partner." Max licked her hand in quiet agreement. It was quiet on the ridge that morning. Not the silence of grief, but the kind that comes after the storm has passed. The kind that lets you breathe again. Laura stood beside the small granite headstone under the oak tree, the same place Thomas Blake had died almost a year ago. Now, another stone sat beside his, smaller, lighter, but no less sacred. Sarah Jensen. She was loved. She was missed. She was found. A bouquet of wild violets lay across the stone, freshly picked. Next to them, Max sat quietly, his graying muzzle pressed against the cool earth, as if listening for a heartbeat beneath it. Laura knelt beside him, resting a hand on his back. "She'd have liked you," she said gently. "You would have made her feel safe." Max didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the ground. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the grass. Wind stirred the leaves above, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. It had been 6 months since the trial. Earl Whitmore was now serving 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He had appealed, of course, claimed evidence tampering, media bias, political sabotage. But his appeals were weak, and his supporters had long since evaporated. Justice had finally caught him, but it hadn't come easy, and it hadn't come fast. It had come on the back of a man who refused to forget and a dog who refused to leave. Max was old now, his eyes clouded slightly, his legs stiff on cold mornings. But his spirit, his purpose, was undiminished. Laura had adopted him officially the week after the trial. The paperwork was unnecessary, but it felt right. She had his photo framed on her desk at the precinct. Some days, people asked if he was a retired canine. She always answered the same way. No, he wasn't trained by the state. He was trained by someone better. One rainy afternoon, Laura received a package with no return address. Inside, a videotape. She dusted off the old VHS player she'd kept in storage, slid the tape in, and pressed play. Grainy footage flickered on the screen. It was a home video. Thomas Blake stood in a clearing, the forest behind him, a younger Max beside him, barely more than a pup. "This is for you, Laura. In case I don't get to say it in person," Thomas said, looking directly into the camera. "You were always the one I hoped would see through the noise. If you're watching this, I guess you did." He scratched Max's ears and smiled. "Take care of the dog. He's a stubborn bastard, but he's loyal. And take care of yourself. You'll need each other." The screen turned to static. Laura sat for a long time, the tape still spinning, the sound of rain tapping the windows like footsteps from another life. In the spring, she was invited to speak at a seminar for young detectives. New recruits eager to chase justice, solve cases, leave their mark. She stood in front of them, wearing her badge, and told the story. Not just about the case, but about Max, about Sarah, and about Thomas Blake, who had chosen the hard road, the lonely one, because he believed a girl's life mattered, even when the system did not. They didn't have a voice, she told the room, but they had each other, and they had a dog who never forgot where the truth was buried. In the end, it wasn't the arrests or the headlines or the medals that mattered. It was the quiet things. The way Max would still stop at the tree during every walk and sit for a while, as if waiting for an old friend to appear from the brush. The way little girls would come up to pet him and ask, "Is he the dog from the story?" And the way Laura would answer, with a tired but proud smile, "Yes, he is." Years later, after Max passed peacefully in his sleep, head resting on a folded police jacket, Thomas's badge beside him, Laura buried him at the same tree, right between the two stones. And beneath his name, she had etched, "Max, the dog who remembered, the dog who led us home." And that was how the story ended. Not with sirens or screams, but with silence and memory and a loyal heart that never stopped believing someone would finally listen. If you found this story gripping, heartfelt, or just downright unforgettable, don't forget to hit that follow button right now. Here on James, True Crime Stories, we bring you real cases, shocking twists, and the hidden truths that others won't tell. And hey, tap that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change the way you see justice, loyalty, or even love. One click and you're part of the journey.